Okay. And hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Let's Write Adventure, Part 7. Um, so we were picking up from 2 weeks ago, where we worked on Part 6. And just for those of you who are new to the stream, we are working on building a D&D adventure from scratch that we decided through our brainstorming session in Part 1, where the characters are hired by a community leader of some kind to recover the only known deposit of cold iron, our MacGuffin for this adventure, which was lost in a glacial mine once ravaged by disease. The community needs it to save themselves from the foretold coming of the Bloodgood Sisters, Coven of Hags. Led to believe the village plans to fight the powerful Fae, they recover the cold iron, but when they return, they discover the village actually intends to use the cold iron to pay off the Coven, thus completing an ancient pact of some kind. The party has to then decide whether to support empowering this Coven with this powerful Fae slaying cold iron, or convince the community to fight back, knowing there's going to be consequences no matter what. So, last time we were working on building out our glacial mine slash fortress and what the characters would have to do to recover this cold iron. And so let me go ahead and share my screen here with you guys real quick. So we spent a little time working on that. We talked about the three uh, the three keys that were going to be required to recover the last deposit of cold iron from the cold iron storage area. Um, we had previously talked about one of the keys being found, being held by the Forge Master of the Forge, who's there as a ghost, pining over her unfinished masterpiece, and the characters having to help her create that or finish that masterpiece in some effect, either through a skill challenge kind of deal with tool proficiencies, or possibly even a possession by the ghost herself. So we get kind of a Ghost of the movie, Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore kind of thing there, which we'll have to do some more building out to come up with the mechanics on. But right now it's a solid idea that could be a lot of fun. The other one being the key being lost by the foreman of the miners in the actual mine tunnels themselves, and that all along the mine section uh, of this fortress glacial structure, um, the characters being hunted by ghouls who are immune to the disease, the pockets of disease in there, and hell bent on attacking and eating the adventurers. And so that one is almost completely fleshed out in terms of what we would need for for the adventure before we have a map. We'll do a little editing to it later. And then the third one, which we focused mainly on last time, was the garrison encounter. So the third key belonging to the garrison commander up in the fortress level, and finding that key in the garrison where the garrison commander was an early victim of the outbreak of this disease and put into a state of suspended animation until they could find a cure, and is now guarded, and then was guarded by loyal guards and some healers who have now gone to their grave but carried their duty beyond that grave and having to fight a group of skeletons, specifically 8 skeleton guards, to get past them to the 3 acolytes, the 3 undead acolytes that were maintaining the commander's state of suspended animation, and then having defeated them, being forced to face the garrison commander, a modified mummy that rises to carry out its final duty, his final duty to defend that key. And that being our kind of main combat encounter here in the traditional sense, with the mines being more of the ghoul encounters being more of a guerrilla strike kind of deal, where the characters are kind of having to manage the combat while searching the mine tunnels, and then there being no combat involved, simply skill checks or a social encounter of some kind in the forge area. We also decided on the actual nature of the disease last time. We talked about doing some modifications and building our own, but uh, I'd say we decided, but let's be honest, I decided that I kind of like the feel of Cackle Fever, which is in the Dungeon Master's Guide already, and how it would play out here. Only making the modification that it could be transmitted through inhalation as well as other means. And so we're going with Cackle Fever here. And in fact, we went down and modified our garrison commander Mummy. So instead of attacks dealing Mummy Rot, which could be difficult for characters of third level to deal with, um, his attacks instead risk Cackle Fever, which would be a little easier for them to manage, although still dangerous if they were to become infected by it. Okay, so this time I actually kind of want to switch gears a little bit. I spent the last week in Scotland for work, and during a period spent up in the Highlands around Glencoe and Glen Etive, it kind of got me thinking about some world building elements. And so I thought maybe this time we could take a swing at building out some of our starting community details. Not that they'll have anything to do with Scotland, but it kind of got me in that mindset. So let's go ahead and let's jump over there instead. So right now, other than we know that we have a starting community, which is going to be important in this adventure because it's a place where the characters are going to begin the adventure, they'll receive the adventure, but also they're going to return there. And that will play a major role in the climax of our story, the final confrontation with the Bloodgood sisters. Um, as a rule of thumb, you really only need to flesh out communities as much as they're going to affect the adventure themselves. So places that the characters are going to come back to over and over and over again deserve some time. Places that they're just going to spend a little bit of time, they're just going to pass through, don't deserve or don't require as much time. Because again, you really only want to fill in details that are necessary. So if it's, so if they're traveling from point A to point B and that, halfway through they stop off at a little town, you don't have to put a lot of detail into a place like that. Just a few notes to yourself to kind of improv your way through it. But in this case, we have a community where the desires of the community or the needs of the community are paramount in this adventure because really it's all about their history with the Bloodgood sisters, the nature of this pact or this deal or this prophecy that was made. And so let's start building them out a little bit here. So we're going to come and hit up our wow, settlement template. Be nice if I could pull the right words out of my brain. Um, it's harder than you might think some days. Anyway, so this template kind of gives you my very general thoughts on the sorts of things that we might want to know. And I say general because these are elements that, one, we may or may not need all of these for any given settlement. And two, there may be things that aren't on here that become important in specific settings. So for example, if your entire adventure takes place within one settlement, like what is it, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, takes place entirely in Waterdeep, right? Like, so the culture of Waterdeep is important in that adventure. So if you're writing an adventure like that, really fleshing out the town or the settlement is really useful because it's going to give you all kinds of information that will allow you to think on your feet and pull threads together as your characters explore. Other places like this, we don't necessarily need to get super deep into the culture or the political structure necessarily, other than just what becomes required through this adventure structure. So, for example, we know that we have a community leader of some kind that will set the characters on this quest, and therefore must have um, the authority to do so. So, we'll fill in the political landscape there, but in this one, we don't need, we don't need to build a whole Senate for the Republic here. We can do things like call them a mayor or a town master or the local lord or whatever we want to use for that. So we're going to kind of work through filling this in. Um, as with everything, we want to just start with what you know or what you're leaning towards. Again, when you're running these things, nothing is set in stone until you actually sit down and play the adventure with your character with your players. And even then, it's not set in stone until you tell your players about it, right? So, um, if we set this in, I don't know, it's a swamp when we initially write it. Well, it's not actually a swamp until we sit down at the table and we tell our players that they're in a swamp. Now it becomes fact. Then only then does it really become fact. Up until that point, you have the option to change things as needed. And so, with that in mind, we're going to slap some clay on the wheel, as it were. Ghost reference. And go ahead and get to work here. So, I frequently like to start with the descriptive details because that just kind of helps me picture what's going on in this place, um, which helps me kind of build out the rest of this, unless I know something specific. Um, I know there's got to be some sort of political or social leader here, but we don't. I don't really have a firm idea of what the governmental structure is here, and might uh, what might be built up to support that. So I don't want to dive into that element just yet, especially because we may be there's this element of this adventure where there's the option to sort of rally the town to fight the hags, which means that we may decide that we want to put um, a standing army in here or a militia in place of some kind, or we may not. We may want it to be just regular townspeople. But that's a decision that we'll make when we balance our encounter with the Bloodgood sisters. So for now, we're going to kind of put a pin in the political landscape, um, and let's focus on some of the sensory details, maybe some of the social details. Now, we decided, I think 2 or 3 um, live streams ago, that this glacial mine would not be set in the far north because that's kind of obvious. Um, and I don't like making obvious decisions if I can avoid them. It's much more fun to make things that are a little out of the ordinary. Um, so we decided that we set in some kind of wasteland. We talked a little bit about a desert, and I like the idea of a desert. I don't like the idea of a desert in the sense of the endless sand dunes. I like something more along the lines of a wasteland desert, a badlands kind of deal, with lots of rock and dead trees and stuff like that, and this glacial mine just kind of rising out of the center of it. And I bring that up here because this settlement would likely be on the edge of it, I think, right? Because it's got, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for this settlement to be targeted by the Bloodgood sisters for this cold iron if they weren't the closest or the most able to acquire this cold iron. For example, um, if this this wasteland where the glacial mine is on the other side of the world, well, she would, or I'd say she, I should say they would target most likely a community much closer to it as opposed to some community that's in a forest 1,000 miles away. So this tells us that they're kind of on the edge of a wasteland, right? And so, but it has to be close enough that it can sustain life. And so let's kind of try to envision what that might look like if this was a badlands kind of area. So lots of rock, lots of withered trees and sandy patches. I could hear sort of the whistling of the wind through the wetlands as it carves its way through sandstone plateaus and natural pillars. Um, and so I would think that there would be almost an oasis kind of feel to this settlement. So let's think about the kinds of things that one might hear here, or see, or smell. Um, when you're writing descriptions, it's best to focus on the senses. When you're coming up with these descriptive details, really boil them down into the the character's five senses. Now that being said, touch and taste are not as common. Your characters, typically, maybe yours does, but most characters don't go around licking the environment. So you don't have to worry too much about tastes when it comes to just sort of your general descriptive details of an environment. Although, if you want to get into, foods and that kind of stuff, those are useful sensory elements that add a lot of flavor. Especially if you've got players in taverns and stuff, or characters in taverns and stuff like that. Um, Same with touch, unless there's something distinctive that they just kind of feel going through. You don't necessarily have to build a lot of touch elements in there, because you can only describe the feel of the wood of the buildings or the stone so often before it becomes kind of repetitive. So I tend to focus on sights, sounds, and smells initially. Um, and with sights, I like to focus on action. It's not just the color of a sunset. It's what people are doing on the street. It is the kind of animals that maybe furtively dart around the corners in the town. Are these vermin like rats? Are these foxes? Do we see wolves at the edge of town? Are there canals and you see fish in the town? That kind of stuff. So um, sounds, and smells are a little more obvious. But again, these are we're thinking things that the characters could experience it in most places throughout the settlement here. Again, with most things, I'll kind of limit myself to three to start. We can build that out later. So we already talked about one. That's the sound of the whistling of the wind. Okay, so let's put that down. The wind whistles through through wind carved sandstone plateaus, pillars. Um, yeah, so we kind of have that. Now, if it's close enough to here in town, that kind of gives us a feel here of some of the things that we might see. We might see plateaus of painted rock and of painted rock sandstone. I think of, like, if you look up pictures of like Utah, stuff like that kind of comes to mind here. Now I did just contradict myself in that I've really just described just the a static element here, which what, that's what I have at the moment. But I am going to want to add some action to this if I can. So we've got plateaus of painted rock and sandstone. Um, let's say, with building. Let's see here, with homes and shops built. We'll say dug directly into the stone. Let's say these are connected by rope bridges that sway in the wind. And bustling with villagers going about their daily tasks. So now with that one element, we took the wind and the rock. Well, with the wind, we got the rock. And with the rock, we now have this idea of almost a vertical um, built village where you've got these two pillars of painted rock, of sandstone, um, like almost this is built into the crevasse of a plateau. Um, and then it's crisscrossed by these rope bridges and these multi-level, and so that kind of gives us a couple more elements to work with here. So now we've got a little more flavor, a little more texture to this place where there's buildings inside the stone, and now there's all these thoroughfares back and forth, and there'd probably be some boardwalk kind of um, uh, walkways, for lack of a better term, that are pegged directly into the stone on the outside so people can walk around in the exterior. And there's probably interior connections as well. Okay, so we've got a little bit of that there. What does it smell like here? Smell is a powerful detail. And it's one that's often overlooked. You smell is you probably have heard, is it is the sense that evokes the most memory. So giving odors to a place can make it feel very real very quickly to your players. So what would we smell the wind here? Oh, we'd smell, let's see here, odors of dust and dry rock. There's that earthy smell that dry rock gets sometimes, especially dust and sand. Let's say odors of dust and sand compete with, what do they compete with? What human smells would be here? If the roads are crisscrossing rope bridges up above, there probably aren't a lot of beasts of burden here. So we're probably not thinking of stuff like a western town where we might smell manure on the wind from the horses, the cattle. No, this is probably cleaner, but let's give it an exotic element as well. Food here. Food is an important element here. I keep coming back to that in my mind. There's something sticking in there. And I kind of want to say that it's competing with spices. Maybe there's a lot, maybe they use a lot of spices in the food here. To kind of zhuzh it up, if you will. And so maybe there's on the market stalls that are kind of set out on the various levels of the sandstone village. Maybe when the wind comes through, it picks up just the barest edge of that, carrying that melange of spice along with it through. So let's see, complete with a blend of spices. Compete with a blend of spices. Odors of dust and sand compete with a blend of spices. Let's say a blend of herbs and spices that scent the wind sent the wind. Yeah, then it just sent the wind. We can just leave that there. We don't have to get any more complicated than that. Great. Okay. So that gives us something else to work with here. We've got these herbs and spices, and so we kind of have to have that accessible to the wind. But at the same time, merchants would take pains to make sure that the wind doesn't blow away their product, right? If this is a windy place, people would have adapted to that. There'd be covers over goods outside. There would be weights used to weigh down things that might blow away, or clips. Um, there'd probably also be decorations and toys that handle the wind. So for example, um, kids probably fly kites here. We might get those pinwheels, that decorate homes. Wind chimes are probably likely here. Ooh, wind chimes. That gives us a good detail, a good sound. Wind chimes tinkle in the tinkle on the porches. Did I spell that right? Porches of homes, businesses set into the rock. And then we've got kids playing, children fly paper kites from the bridges that crisscross the crisscross between the plateaus. Cool. Yeah, all right, crisscross, all one word, no hyphen. Very good, very good. Okay, so that gives us those. I'll say merchants advertise their wares on the porches of their stony shops with nets and clips to keep lighter wares from flying off on the wind. Cool. And there's certainly cleaner ways to write that sentence, but it's good enough for the moment. Great. Okay. So it gives us a couple sensory details here with action, sound. Smells. Nothing else jumps out at me. If something jumps out at you, feel free to toss it into the comment section or into the chat, and we can add that in later. In fact, just as a general reminder, whenever we're working on this, if you're watching it in real time with me, please feel free to contribute in the chat. I do have that open here, so if there's ideas that jump out at you, send them this way. And if they jump out at you later, add them in the comments section. I'd be happy to work those in as we see fit. But okay, so typical sounds. I imagine there's a lot of birds here. Yeah, I can imagine there being a number of birds, things like swallows or kites, but specifically kites like the bird of prey, not like the thing that kids fly. I guess adults fly kites too, but not the pastime, but kites like falcons. And so they make a noise. So we'll say um, songs of swallows nesting on bare rock um, are punctuated by the cries of hunting falcons after a kill. Cool. Okay, so we've got some detail there. We've got a little bit of a feel to this place too. So let's talk. Let's see about social hierarchy here. Hmm. Hmm. I have to admit that when I work on these things, I am not terribly inclined to do kings and queens and you know princes and princesses and royalty in the fashion that we generally think of it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just feel there's a lot of that in fantasy, and it seems to be kind of the default that that you have a monarchy in these places. Again, not a problem if that is enjoyable to you and your players in your fantasy world. Great. Those things are classics for a reason. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those. I find that the fantasy that I write tends to be more colonial American inspired in a lot of ways, or from Wild West kind of stuff, and so I like plutocracies. I like um, sort of corrupted republics. I like places where the lines of power are not as neatly drawn, or they are very neatly drawn and therefore kind of autocratic. Um, these sorts of places, I just kind of led themselves to the stories that I like to write and tell. Um, and but let's see, what kind of thing do we need for this place? So this place is, you know what? Let's pause that for a moment. Let's give this community a name. It needs something other than starting community. That's just a little too on the nose. We need to call it something. Um, so you can go with a lot of different conventions in terms of naming places. Um, I like to give places names that kind of represent something important about the place. And I do that, not because it's a fancy trope, although it is. To give names to places like, I don't know, Deadwood and Coldwater and Deep Harbor and things like that. But it also it helps your players kind of remember a place in particular, especially if you're going to have them moving about various locations and locales, which I'm prone to do in my adventures. I like to keep my characters, like to keep my players moving their characters around, because it I think gives a wider swath of the world, of the worlds that I build, and I also like to do some exploration and some travel. I think that it's a lot of fun to get players um, planning for extended journeys, and what they might face in that capacity. And we'll see some of that when we get into the setback section and write this. Um, but uh, but yeah, so let's give this a name. Let's give this something we can call it. So let's go to Fantasy Name Generator and let's go to places and locations. And let's go down to city and town names. And let's go fantasy town names. We can come up with our own. We probably will end up coming up with our own. But let's kind of cycle through this and see what jumps out at us. So we've kind of got a very oasis in the desert kind of thing. Ooh, that means we need to talk about water. We need to go back and figure out where the water comes from and how that affects the town. Maybe there's a river that runs through the base of it. Maybe that's part of the reason why it's all built up onto the rock face along the sides, is because it's the plateau is bisected by this winding river that's kind of cut through to create this gorge, and there's no room on either side. It's just stone, and so the town is built up around that. So they've got that water supply down below, and in that sort of meandering river, and then we have the town built vertically up above. So with that in mind, let's click the button a bunch of times here and see what jumps out at us. So Steam Rest, interesting. Heart Gulf, Fear Storm, Swanbow, Ebonhorn, Fayshire. No. Still Vaults, Mudvale, Gulch. The word Gulch kind of sticks out at me. I kind of like that here. So something Gulch, maybe. Let's call this. What do we call this? What do we call the village? Sky Song Gulch. Yeah, Sky Song Gulch. I like that. We'll make Sky Song one word, and then Gulch will be two, and that's kind of our name here. Yeah, so in the end, sometimes just clicking through the options here just kind of gets my brain working, and I end up not using anything I found in the generator, but it gives me just that little bit of extra input that helps me come up with new ideas. So let's call this Sky Song Gulch. Great. I've never used Gulch in a settlement name before. I rather like it. Okay. Gives this kind of a westerny vibe here too, which, I'm kind of digging. I like undead and westerns. I think they're a good pairing. Okay, so I'm gonna delete some of this stuff because I created this template with kind of directions for its use built into it to make it easy, but we don't need those right now. And so so things like telling us that we should go specific as opposed to universal, and we don't need that. We know that. We've talked about that. So let's compress that just a little bit. Okay. We'll write a general description here. Let's go ahead and do that, actually. Let's go ahead and do that just so that we have captures from the guiding information here. So, Sky Song Gulch is a town built vertically into the walls of a canyon, of a narrow canyon. Is a town. There we go. The walls of narrow canyon, carved through painted rock sandstone by a slow moving river. And I should point out, painted rock, you're probably aware, but in case you aren't, it's the kind of rock that has the different striations in them, where you get different colors throughout because the stone is different colors, and so you kind of get those pinks and oranges and whites and what have you. Again, look at some photos of like hiking in Utah. That's kind of what I'm holding on my mind, and that's got a lot of elements here. So to that end, if you were a visually inclined person or you wanted some reminders of these sorts of things, there's nothing wrong with doing what we call a mood board, and that's where you go and you find pictures online that kind of give you the vibe of a place, and you can just put those right into your template here. I find that I don't need a lot of mood boards to kind of hold that into my head. Although if I'm ever really not quite certain what a thing looks like in my imagination, I'll create them from time to time. They're a good tool. Strongly suggest and recommend. They're easy to build with doing something like getting Canva. So like canva.com, you can do a free account and do some image searches on there and build those into a grid or what have you. Um, and then you can just export that and put it here. If that works for you. There's a million other programs you can use to do that. I like Canva. I like Canva a lot. So when I do that, I generally use Canva. Okay, so we got this slow-moving river. The buildings themselves are carved into the stone. We'll say are dug into the stone. With overhanging porches connected by a carved road and wooden boardwalk, we'll say. The two sides of the canyon are connected by rope bridges that crisscross in several places on each level. Okay, kind of gives me my general description here. Places, not place. Sure, we'll do that. Several places in each level. Kind of gives me a general description here, my guiding light. I don't like to do more than a paragraph under that general description section because it's not useful to me when I play. I really like to write this in a way that I can kind of glance at it and get the details, so that it doesn't slow the game down when the players arrive here, the characters arrive here for the first time. So we've kind of got that. So we've got that here. Now we've got Sky Song Gulch sort of forming in our heads. Let's move down here let's talk about some of the social elements here to kind of really fix that in our brains. It's worthwhile noting here that when you're writing descriptions, less is more, right? You want a few well-chosen details as opposed to just an enormous brain dump, which is not to say that when you're writing this, you can't just brain dump everything that you know about a place. And in fact, if you've got a lot of stuff rattling in your head about it, do that. Absolutely 100% brain dump. But just know that before you deliver this information to your players, go back and cull all of the extraneous and really narrow it down to a few key points. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if your players envision this place exactly as you envision. In fact, it's better if you leave some room for them to fill in their own imaginary details about this, because then they'll add some layers to the story and become a tapestry of a place that feels very real to both you and to them. There's no need to berate every single point, try to hammer down every single detail. Leave some room for the imagination to grow, and it'll become more memorable in a more textured place. That said, you want to know what you need to run the game, right? So here, let's see here, social and political. Social. I also like to talk a little bit about the culture sometimes. Um, but I don't. So we definitely have a merchant class in here. And are they? I kind of. I don't know why I feel this on this, but I kind of feel like they would be the ruling class in this particular community. Um, that this is that wealth makes power here. That wealth makes right. I have that idea. I don't know that it's perfect for this, but and that could just be coming back to me pulling associations from westerns of powerful cattle ranchers buying off the local marshal and that kind of stuff, which fits and doesn't fit into this, um, because the townspeople are not the bad guys here, right? This isn't the story as we have envisioned it at the moment is not about socio-political struggle. It's about um, a town effectively held hostage. And so it's probably worthwhile spending some time at this point figuring out what that relationship between the town and the Bloodgood sisters is. Hmm. Hmm. So let's talk about what we know then about this. Um, and let's make a special section in here. Um, we'll put it under general description and let's make it a second heading and we'll say, we'll call it the deal for the moment. Maybe we'll change it. But it's the relationship between the town and the Bloodgood sisters, because there's something that's forcing the town to entertain the demands of the Bloodgood sisters. And yes, it could be something as simple as as do what we say. The Bloodgood sisters are these witches coming in and saying, "Oh, you do what we say, or we're going to destroy your village." But that doesn't feel very haggish, as opposed to haggis, but very haggish. If you catch my meaning, like hags don't, in D&D at least, the concept of hags typically, and bear in mind that as a DM, you're welcome to adjust this and change how that works in your world. But from the way that I like to play them is that they're not going to come at you head on for the most part, right? They're almost like social ambush predators, right? Where they're gonna dangle some kind of boon and let you slink closer and give it a good sniff, and then when you take that first bite, they're gonna come at you from the sides, right? Like raptors in Jurassic Park. They're psychological raptors, right? The thing that you think is going to be the danger is never where the danger comes from with hags. It comes from somewhere else, which is what makes them so engaging in my mind, I think, because your players are going to know that they're tricksy, but they're never going to quite know what the trick is until said trap is sprung. So that means that might makes right sort of situation here really isn't the issue. Maybe it's a service that the hags provided some time ago, right? This could be a situation where the town was in desperate need of something. A need so desperate that they weren't willing to look a gift horse in the mouth, as it were. And they made this deal. Not an individual of the town, so it's not a deal with the mayor. It's a deal that a mayor made on behalf of the town, which was binding to that place. And So it's something a service already rendered that now they have to pay for, or else there will be consequences. Hmm. This is an important question, something we're going to have to be very, very careful about, because it's also going to affect, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to affect how the town itself works, but it's also going to affect how how inspiring the town to stand up against the hags can play out, right? Because it means that it has to be something that could. The terms of defaulting on this pact have to be so frightening that the townspeople would do almost anything to avoid it. But not so inevitable that driving off the hags wouldn't prevent it. Hmm. 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 Water comes to mind, right? This is kind of a wasteland, deserty environment. Water is the limiting resource in a lot of cases, stuff like this. So maybe years ago, yes, maybe years ago, the hags, the town, let's say that maybe the river was running dry years ago. Maybe that's it. The river was running dry. You know, this town was going to be destroyed. They have no source of water, no way to sustain their population here, and so desperate, they made a deal with the hags to ward off this drought. Mm. See, here we could come back to a Western classic again, where maybe the hags caused the drought initially so that they could gain leverage over the town. You know, simple thing, they have their minions build a dam upriver, right? And so the water begins to trickle away and start to evaporate. This is a situation we've seen in a number of Western movies. Even Quantum of Solace, the James Bond movie, kind of has this situation as well, where yes, the hags could sort of set up this side scheme to to end the water supply into the town, or reduce the water supply into the town, forcing them into desperation, forcing them into making this deal that the hags will restore the water. If the Bloodgood Sisters will restore the water, if the town will acquire this cold iron. Hags are patient, but they're not super patient. So that means that it has to be a relatively new deal. In the past, I don't know, year or two. This can't be a super ancient thing if that's the case. Maybe there was a term on it. The waters will return for a period of no less than, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Now we're going down a rabbit hole. We don't necessarily need to know that. What we need to know is the basics. Let's see here. So let's capture that. Bloodgood Sisters. Dammed up the river. We're going to say north. It's an arbitrary direction, but worldwide, most rivers run north to south, with notable exceptions like the Nile. A river in denial. I'm full of bad jokes. Anyway, Bloodgood Sisters dammed up the river north, constricting water supply to the town. Let's say or two. Don't have to say the town. It has a name now. Sky Song Gulch. Without the citizens' knowledge. And that suggests one citizen. It should be plural citizens' knowledge. Desperate to avoid the impending drought. The people of Sky Song made a deal with the Blood Good Sisters for ensuring the town's water supply for a period of TK years. They would recover the last known reserve of cold iron and deliver it to the hags. Cool. Right. So one thing, so we kind of put this in loose terms here. We'll redefine that as we continue on in building out this adventure. I think it's important to say that the hags agreed to ensure water to the town for a period of years, as opposed to just forever, because I think that later on that might give us something, might give the players some leverage to work with, right? So later on, when it comes time to talk to the town about this and try to convince them to turn on the hags, pointing out that the hags did, were responsible for the water shortage initially, which now we're gonna have to build in a way for the players to figure that out, or the characters to figure that out. But noting the hags were responsible for that water shortage originally, and then pointing out that there's nothing in the terms of this agreement to stop them from doing that again at the end of this period of years, forcing the town, forcing Sky Song Gulch into this perpetual servitude to the hags. I think those facts help the characters make a powerful argument to get the town on their side. And so we'll have to figure out a way for them to find that information in our adventure. And so that gives a couple things we need to sprinkle throughout. And then that gives them some tools to work with at the end, some levers to pull to get the town on their side, which is always useful stuff. So we'll refine that as we need to in the future, but I think that's a good start for our deal, as well as some of the important elements of our town, which is now Sky Song Gulch. Cool. All right, so that's pretty much all the time we have for this week. We're going to get back to our every week schedule here. So if you're watching this again in real time, we're going to pick this up on April 20th. So that's this coming Saturday for part 8. So as always, thank you so much for joining me. If you've liked this video or any of my other videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. That helps me grow and do more of this content for you guys. And thank you so much for taking this time with me, and I look forward to seeing you next week for part 8. Thanks.